This happened to my dad and I on a camping trip back in 2015. I'm 23 now, but this experience is one that will forever scar me for life. Growing up, I lived in a very rural area in Idaho. The news media and the people who lived in my town were ultra conservative, and pretty much just about everyone around town owned a gun. Being so young, I didn't really understand why, but as I got older, I was learning how to shoot and how to use a gun properly. To the east of my town, there are huge mountains that stretch across the state and go on for miles. As a kid who loved the outdoors, my dad would occasionally take me there to go hunting and fishing once in a while. A few years ago, my dad and I had gone over there to go on a camping/hunting trip so that I could experience a bigger picture of survival and such. When we get there, we pitch our tent and start hiking a few miles into the woods to see if we can try and find anything. Even though I liked the outdoors, I wasn't too big on the idea of killing an animal, as I didn't see a point in the sport. My dad had managed to hunt a rabbit for dinner, and we brought it back to the campsite, and my dad turned that rabbit into a damn good stew. It wasn't what we were hoping to get, but it was certainly better than nothing. After we had ate, my dad had recommended that I go to sleep, as we would have a long day tomorrow with more hunting. Being a kid that goes to bed way too late, I for some reason took my dad's advice and gone to bed while my dad stayed carving a few pieces of firewood to use with his pocket knife. Needless to say, I probably fell asleep for a good hour or so before I woke up to hear my dad unzip the tent and go to bed beside me. The light from the fire was still giving off a really bright glow on the tent, and so I tapped my dad's shoulder and asked him to put it out. However, he must have been dead asleep because he didn't bother responding to my question. Not even 5 seconds later, my dad comes towards the tent, unzips it, and asks what I need from outside. The very second my dad opens the tent, his eyes became wide, filled with fear. He ever so slowly puts his fingers to his lips and tells me to be quiet. It only took me a few seconds to realize what was going on. I slowly turned my head to my left and see a man I had never seen before giving me a wicked smile. His hair was long and messy and his teeth were cracked. At that point, I screamed at the top of my lungs and I saw this man bolt up and run outside the tent, disappearing back into the woods. My dad tried shooting at him, but missed terribly due to how dark it was. We left our tent there and hopped into the truck driving to the police station. We explained everything to the police, but they couldn't really do anything as we had very little information. We went back to go get our stuff, and we thankfully never saw that man again. And that's why I will never be going camping again. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I could do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, The only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. It's about a 10-mile drive from my town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes there would be really shifty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these old beat-up $500 cars just barreling along the roads meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars also look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. That being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the National Forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something like that had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPSs on our smartphones, but none of us had any service seeing as we were in the middle of the woods. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service Rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. Needless to say, we drive a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That being said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running and we set up our tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. There was a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time and just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we were eating, we noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was the moonlight filtering its way in through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself, however. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided that it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, and so we decided to go and investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and 2 of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. Our other friend, Isaac, decides to stay behind and pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source and the situation gets even stranger. All of the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought that it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seems strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh crap!" A few seconds later after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what that light was after all. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlights and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend, Isaac, walking around the site. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand, which seemed a little odd. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we had probably been gone for over an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering into the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up on the road we came on. We figured that he was just going to use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. Apparently, after we had left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it? We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in the magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I ask. I was watching a movie on my phone. Then I fell asleep, I guess. But you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? Isaac said that he had been in the tent since we left and that he had been wearing the same clothes all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decided to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent. We just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything still in it. We jump into the F-150 and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been laying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation and no one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but thank God it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights turned off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. After about 45 minutes of speeding along the gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I finally decide to go a different way just to be safe. Luckily, I didn't get pulled over for a DUI. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I have driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I will never go down that road again. When I was about 13, I joined the Boy Scouts with a friend of mine that I had known since kindergarten. I wasn't too big on the idea of scouts, but it was something that I considered as productive and something to do. I spent about a good 3 years with them and had met some pretty cool people in my troop that I'm still connected with till this day. During my final year in the Scouts, my troop had to complete a 2-day camping trip as a requirement for the Eagle rank. The purpose of this last and final trip was to use the skills we were taught and apply them in a more complex camping trip. The campsite was called Daniel Boone in North Carolina, which was a very remote location next to a few mountains. When we got there, our scoutmaster had ordered us to unpack our belongings and set up our tents as we only had about a good hour of daylight left. My friend Anthony and I set up our tent right beside a lake a bit further away from the other scouts, but far away enough to where we could still see them. After everything got settled down, the sun had finally set, and a bunch of us started getting a campfire going so we could sit down and enjoy the warmth as it was in the 40s. Anthony had mentioned that he would be staying in the tent as he didn't feel well and that he would pass. We all sat around the fire, talking and having a good time when our scoutmaster called for lights out. I could tell that he was in a really upset mood, and I didn't want to risk asking if we could have more time. I bit my lip a bit annoyed and walked back to our tent to find that Anthony wasn't in there. Thinking that he probably went to go take a piss or something, I get into my sleeping bag and turn out my light and start laying there enjoying the cool night air. Fast forward about 10 minutes later, Anthony still hadn't returned yet, and it was at this point where I was starting to get a little worried. 10 minutes turned into 20, and then eventually 30. Fearing that Anthony could have gotten lost, I put on my jacket and go outside with my flashlight looking for Anthony. It eventually came to the point where I had to begin yelling out Anthony's name, hoping to get a response. But all I got instead was dead silence. This got the attention of some other campers coming to ask what was wrong. When I explained the situation, we all went into the woods with our flashlights in hand calling for Anthony. That's when we heard a very loud and blood-curdling scream coming from the other side of the lake. We all booked it and ran around the lake to find Anthony laying down by the shoreline on some rocks. He had multiple wounds to his body and was breathing heavily, but was still able to talk to us. What he told us will forever change my perspective of camping for the rest of my life. Apparently, he had stepped out of the tent to go take a walk around the lake when 2 or 3 men ran out from the woods and tackled him. One of the men proceeded to hit him in the face with a mallet and knocked him out cold. Because the impact of the mallet was so hard, he didn't have the strength to fight back. We ended up ending and rescheduling the trip the next day and went back home. The authorities never did find those men in the woods that attacked Anthony. I'm not sure who they were or what they wanted, but whatever their intentions were, they obviously weren't good.